boys and girls. Welcome to day 2 of, or the classroom teacher portion of day 16, which is a little confusing because we kind of flip-flop. So today you're actually going to work with Mrs. Foley for a little bit on handout 18B, and then you're going to come back to me and we're going to read the next 2 chapters and do a question set. So it's important that you have your novel. There is no InSync journal today, even though Mrs. Foley does say InSync journal. We did that yesterday, but you do need handout 18B. Okay, so here we go.
Hi, 5th graders. Welcome back to Wit and Wisdom in Sync. I'm Ms. Foley, and this is Module 1, Cultures in Conflict. Ready to get started? You will need a few materials for this lesson. You'll need your copy of Thunder Rolling in the Mountains. You'll need handout 18B, your Wit and Wisdom in Sync journal, and a pen or a pencil. If you need to pause the video to gather any of these materials, please feel free to do so now. I want to remind you of how much work you've done in this learning arc. Please read the focusing question with me. What important beliefs and values guide Chief Joseph and his daughter, Sound of Running Feet? Remember back where we started and how far we've come. Wow! Throughout this learning arc, you've been gathering evidence of Chief Joseph's and Sound of Running Feet's beliefs and values as reflected in their thoughts, their words, and what they do or their actions in the story. You're about to have the opportunity to express your understanding of this question in Focusing Question Task 5. You'll use the evidence that you've been busy gathering to write a comparison-contrast essay. Your job is to explain the similarities and differences between Sound of Running Feet's and her father's beliefs and values. Next, you'll need handout 18B. If you need to pause the video to retrieve it, please do so now. I'd like you to take a moment to think about the question that's on the slide. Read it with me. How does gathering and elaborating on evidence prepare you to write about the character's beliefs and values? Well, that's a good question. And in order to write, you need a strong understanding of Chief Joseph and Sound of Running Feet and what they believe in and value the most. As you've been reading, you've been recording specific evidence of what each character's beliefs and values are and explaining what it shows about each of those characters. The goal is for you to have a strong, organized collection of evidence and thinking to draw from when it's time for you to write. In addition to gathering and elaborating on evidence, what else do you think you're going to need to do to prepare to write a comparison-contrast essay about Chief Joseph and Sound of Running Feet? Pause the video for a moment and think about that. Jot a list of things that you think you'll need to do in order to prepare. Thumbs up if you said that you'd need to learn how to actually write a comparison-contrast essay. Yep. You've actually developed the skills for writing a comparison-contrast paragraph, and now you've reached the point when you're ready to write a longer essay. There is one important step that we're going to work through in this lesson to prepare for the actual writing. In later lessons, you'll learn more about the comparison-contrast essays themselves and how they work. How do I analyze my evidence and elaboration to prepare to write a comparison-contrast essay? What do you think it means to analyze our evidence and elaboration for a comparison-contrast essay? Analyze. Analyze is a verb, and it means to examine closely. So Why is it important to analyze our evidence of Chief Joseph's and Sound of Running Feet's beliefs and values? How can that help us to prepare to write a comparison-contrast essay? Closely examining the evidence we've collected is going to help us discover what beliefs and values that they have in common and those that they don't share. I bet you see a familiar symbol on this box. It's the hashtag symbol, and it's used in some social media to group messages about a single subject or a topic. Well, we're going to use two hashtags also. We're going to use hashtag similar and hashtag different to help us group our elaboration on handout 18 according to whether it represents beliefs or values that both Chief Joseph and Sound of Running Feet share, or differences between their beliefs and values. It sounds pretty fun, doesn't it? Let's look at an example together. Well, remember when we started our evidence collection, I thought I might need more room. So remember, I recopied 18B onto a little bit bigger piece of paper so I could write more on it. And here is the evidence that I've been collecting right along with you. So let's see how we might do this and analyze our evidence, especially the elaboration. I am looking for ways in which Chief Joseph's beliefs and values and Sound of Running Feet's beliefs and values might overlap or might be distinctly different. And I'm going to mark that with a hashtag. So let's see. Right here, Chief Joseph, this was in the beginning of the book, Chief Joseph knows of the impending flood of settlers, and he's trying to think of the best way for his people to live peacefully, so he's planning to leave. And we know that that was something that Sound of Running Feet was opposed to, so I'm going to write hashtag different. I also think that this is an interesting one right here. Sound of Running Feet loves her homeland so much that she would defy her father in order to stay. I said this is an interesting one because look at this. She loves her homeland. That is similar, right? Whereas this, defying her father in order to stay, meaning she would do anything including fight to stay, that is different. So this particular piece of evidence is interesting because I could consider it to be both similar and different depending on the part of the evidence I'm looking at. Let's see if there's one more we could see. How about this one? Sound of Running Feet cared for her. Remember when she ran into the battlefield and she was working to retrieve Red Owl, the little 7-year-old boy? That's because she cared so deeply for her people and she would risk her life for them. And this caring deeply for people in her tribe, I would say, is hashtag similar to Chief Joseph. All right, so I hope this gives you a good idea of how you might look through your elaboration and your evidence and make some notes to yourself about whether there are differences or similarities between the beliefs and values that you've noted of Sound of Running Feet and Chief Joseph. For this check for understanding, you're going to analyze evidence and elaboration. And how you'll do that is to review handout 18B, focusing especially on the elaboration column. Label each value or belief in the elaboration column. Hashtag similar to represent beliefs or values that Sound of Running Feet and Chief Joseph share. Hashtag different to represent differences between their beliefs and values. Pause the video now to review and analyze your evidence organizers for both characters. As you continue to read the novel, you'll gather more evidence of the characters' beliefs and values. And as you do, don't be surprised if you find that there are some beliefs and values that you thought were different that are actually shared, and the opposite, vice versa. Remember that your evidence organizer is what we call a living document. That means you're continuing to build on it and add to it over time. And in fact, I bet you're going to find more interesting evidence to add to it very soon. Thank you so much for learning with me today. I look forward to seeing you next time.
Okay, so let's get into chapters 11 and 12. Hold on 1 second. Okay, boys and girls, let's go ahead and read chapters 11 and 12. Please follow along in your books, or you can follow along on my screen or your screen with me. I'm sorry for all the noise. My neighbor is getting his lawn mowed and the leaves blown off the grass, and it's really loud. Okay, so chapter 11. With sick hearts, we packed in the dark to leave. 4 of our best warriors lay dead. Besides Waleedites and red moccasin tops, we had lost Rainbow and 5 wounds. Only a few families were not mourning a lost relative. The bluecoats were pinned in rifle pits among the trees and could not see our camp. A dozen of our warriors kept them busy fighting so we could get away. My father was in charge of our escape. He rounded up the horses and we got ready to go. We pulled down the teepees that had not burned and used the poles to make travois for the badly wounded. With my baby sister on my back, I helped put Fairland, Ollicott's wife, on a travois. She was near death, but Ollicott was still fighting and could not be with her. Those whose wounds were not dangerous we tied onto ponies. I helped Whitefeather onto her horse. She made a face from pain as I boosted her into the saddle. Early in the fighting, a bullet struck her in the shoulder. It knocked her to the ground and made her dizzy. She grabbed at something to pull herself up. It was the boot of a bluecoat. He smashed his rifle butt into her face. The blow split her lip and broke one of her front teeth. Her lip was swollen and she was no longer pretty, but she would live. Before we started off, we buried many of our dead. As we wrapped them in soft buffalo robes, we wailed songs of mourning. The sounds pierced the air as our loss pierced our hearts. With each one, we buried some of people's prized possessions. Some of that person's prized possessions: a flute, a necklace, a bracelet of copper wire, an embroidered headband. When I helped bury my beautiful mother, my tears fell hot on her wrappings. With knives, we dug shallow graves in little ravines along the river bank. There we placed our dead and pulled earth over them. Chief Joseph led the women, children, old men, and the rest of our warriors away from Big Hole. Whitebird, who was too old to fight, rode with us. The other chiefs stayed to fight. We left many buffalo robes and much food. Our things were scattered on the ground. We traveled toward the low rolling hills, then swung south toward the mountains. As we moved away, the sound of battle grew faint. In the gray dawn, a broad path stretched behind us where our ponies' feet trampled the grass. The travois poles made furrows in the ground. Our warriors would find it easy to follow. The morning mists cleared and the summer sun beat down upon us. Clouds of dust rose around the travois. We stopped often to shade the eyes of our wounded and to wet their parched lips. After a long half sun, we halted at a little stream shaded by willows. The sun was still in the sky, but our wounded could travel no farther. That night, Fairland died. My father held her hand as she died, and he grieved with me. We grieved for my mother, too. As the spirit of Ollicott's wife entered the afterworld, we saw my mother die again. My father sighed deeply. "We never make war on women and children," he said, "but the bluecoats kill our women and children first. This is a shameful way to fight." The war no longer stirred me. Before this, we had beaten the bluecoats with little trouble. Few of our people had been killed, but now we lost many My heart was wrenched out of me. I feared for Swan Necklace and feared for my people, but I could not think about my fears. Bending Willow cried for her mother and for my mother's milk. I fed her soft mush, but she spat it out and cried harder. Then Dear Woman knelt by my side. Her baby had been killed by the Bluecoats. She picked up Bending Willow and held her close, letting her drink the milk that her own baby no longer needed. We slept little that night. There were many wounded to care for. I carried water, changed bandages, and fed camas mush to those who could eat. I comforted those who cried out in pain. In the morning, as we were packing the horses, the warriors rode into camp. Swan Necklace was safe. "Do not fear for me," he said. "Bullets cannot kill me as long as I have my war whistle." When he went into battle, he sounded his war whistle. It was made from the wing bone of a crane, and its piercing cry called Swan Necklace's guardian spirit to protect him. "Red Moccasin Tops lies dead," I answered. "His guardian spirit protected him only from wounds on his body," said Swan Necklace. "He was shot in the throat. And Willitites and Rainbow and all our other brave warriors who lie dead?" "Perhaps Willitites was shot before he could pick up his charm of weasel skin and raven feathers," said Swan Necklace. "Rainbow's guardian spirit protected him in battle only after sunrise. Then he could walk among his enemies. He was struck while the sky was dark." I wondered at his words and prayed to the Great Spirit Chief to protect him. We buried Fairland with her elk hide dress that she wore on feast days and a shell necklace from the land of the great waters. We wailed songs of grief for her. Before we left our camp, the war council met once more. Looking Glass was in disgrace. He had failed the people. "We had traveled too slowly and have been too careless," said Whitebird. "We cannot fight again. If we kill one soldier, 1,000 will take his place. But if we lose one warrior, there is no one to take his place." The council heard his words and chose a new leader. It was Lean Elk, a young warrior with a tight mouth and burning eyes. At noon, he sent us south with his burning gaze. Chapter 12. Lean Elk kept us on the move. Warriors rode at the head of our band. In the rear. The women, children, and old men rode in the middle with our extra horses. We were on our ponies before daybreak and traveled until the sun was halfway up the sky. Then we stopped to cook a meal. The ponies grazed while we rested. Then we got back into the saddle and traveled again until long after dark. Each sun we journeyed far. More of our wounded died. Gray Eagle, the father of White Feather, died after 3 sons. One old woman who had been hit in the belly stayed behind to die alone. She said she could go no farther on a travois. I believe that she felt she slowed our march and endangered the tribe. We laid her in the shade of a willow and left food and a bottle of water beside her. We crossed the mountains and turned again toward the rising sun. When we rested, we talked. People talked against the whites and agreed that they were all enemies. Settlers from the Bitterroot Valley had fought beside the soldiers at Big Hole. The same people who had smiled at us and sold us sugar had killed our women and children as they slept. Anger ran deep through the camp. When our scouts stole horses from the ranches we passed, no Namipu said a word against them. The horses we took could not be used by the soldiers who came after us. On one raid for horses, the warriors killed 3 men on a ranch, but our warriors obeyed Chief Joseph. They did not scalp the dead men. Instead, they covered the bodies with blankets. They took no money, only cloth to bandage our wounded. One morning, scouts warned that soldiers were nearby. The one-armed general and his men were at the place we had camped last night, between 2 clear streams filled with trout. There was shade from cottonwoods and willows and deep grass for horses. The soldiers stopped there to rest. The chiefs called the warriors together. If the general has no horses, the Bluecoats cannot ride," said Lean Elk. "If he has no mules, the general will have no wagons. Without wagons, he cannot follow us. Tonight we steal his herds." That day we rested in the camas meadows. The camas blossoms had faded. The roots were still small, but we gathered enough to feed us for many suns. Some we ate raw, the rest we dried. We would mix them with huckleberries and shape them into cakes. The cakes were easy to carry on our horses. While we worked, the chiefs planned the raid. After the sun had dropped behind the mountains, the warriors went out in 3 bands, with Allocott, Looking Glass, and Tohuhulsoot as leaders. Swan Necklace and Two Moons rode with Allocott. When the raiding party left, I slipped out and climbed on my pony. I did not tell my father. I knew he would forbid me to go. Beneath a half moon, the warriors rode, swift and silent in the night. I rode behind them, careful to stay back, so they could not hear me. As we neared the soldiers' camp, the horses slowed. I watched as the warriors rode among the tethered animals and cut their hobbles. They had worked for only a few minutes when a soldier called, "Who are you there?" A shot rang out. One of our warriors had fired his gun. It alarmed the soldiers. They began shouting. A bugle sounded. The warriors yelled and waved buffalo robes to make the herds run. Then they pulled back, firing over their shoulders as they rode away. Before they left, one of the warriors grabbed a blazing stick from a fire and set the wagons ablaze. General Howard was left with piles of ashes. Suddenly there were wild screams, and a herd rushed past, plunging through the mist. Allocott caught the animals with his fast riders and turned them back toward our camp. Stampeding animals were all around me. The Great Spirit Chief must have been watching, because the animals parted and made a river on each side of me. I could feel their hot breath, but as they pounded past, they did not even brush my legs. Swan Necklace rode by with several horses. He did not see me. After he passed, he fired his rifle and snapped a whip over their backs. The horses screamed and ran in among the herd. A powerful hand grabbed my arm, the fingers pressing so hard against the bone that I winced. A cold knife blade touched my throat. A gruff voice said, "Who is here?" It was Tohuhulsoot. "It's sound of running feet," I whispered. My mouth was dry with fear. "Ah," he said in disgust, "you are going to get yourself killed." He dropped my arm and put the knife back in his belt. Tohuhulsoot snatched my pony's reins, then rode off after the stampeding herd, dragging me behind him. Before we had ridden far, the darkness faded. In the first gray light we saw that we had captured only 3 horses, but we had taken all of the general's mules. We had no time to talk about the raid. The soldiers were close behind us. Half of the warriors slid off their horses and made ready to fight. The rest of us rode on with the mules. Tohuhulsoot dropped the reins of my pony and slapped it on the rear. "Get back to camp," he shouted, and turned to join the warriors, who crouched behind rocks. Not long after we had reached Camas Meadows, the rest of the warriors came riding in. They were in high spirits. Only one had been struck, and his wound was light. The bullet had skimmed his arm. It left a bloody path, but did not stop him from joining in the feast. His hurt was so small that the warriors gave him a new name, Little Wound. It was the happiest time for us. Our warriors sang, and the old people crooned songs they had forgotten. We had taken a small revenge against the one-armed general. It gave him shame. A new spirit ran through the camp, some of the same spirit we had before the white general came. We had beaten his soldiers in the battles for the Clearwater and Whitebird Canyon. We beat them again, Ferocious Bear said. He sat on the spotted pony and shouted to everyone in the camp, to the lame and to the women who could only weave baskets and gather camas roots. At last he went to our last redcoat and put a heavy hand on him. He said nothing, just gave Swan Necklace's arm a powerful squeeze. Okay, and the last thing that you need to do today is head on over to Schoology and go to question set 21. Read these passages from Thunder Rolling in the Mountains, in which Sound of Running Feet shares 2 Nez Perce myths with young members of her tribe. Then answer each item. Okay, so here is the first passage, here is the second passage, and then here is the question where it starts. And then you can go on to the next one, and it also gives the same passage here in the second part of question 1. You go to question 3, and it's its own single question, so you can read the passages again if you need to. And then the last one, just one answer for this. It's a single standalone question. You press review and then finish. And then let's see if there's anything else for us to do today. Okay, so that's it for today. If you need to reread any of the chapters or complete anything from the last 2 days, then you can go ahead and do that. Make sure that you have done hashtag similar or hashtag different for your handout 18B. And then that is it for today. See you on Monday.